Audio test one for the meeting stream. Audio test two for the meeting stream.
Sound test, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We've received no regrets to date, so I'm going to ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Conseillère Plante.
Ici.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Bradley.
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Here.
You have quorum, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I'm sure you've noticed that I'm not your official chair today. Chair Dudas was kind enough to give me an opportunity to chair this meeting. But before we proceed with the agenda, the chair, as I said, has asked that I preside, but I do need the will of the committee to agree to that. So do I have the will of the committee to chair today's meeting? Thank you very much. We've received no declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes from Tuesday, November 26, 2024. Are those minutes carried? Carried, thank you. Responses to inquiries. The following response to inquiry has been listed on today's agenda. Alternative funding for housing solution. Does anybody want to lift that item onto the agenda? Okay. We'll carry on. Our first item on the agenda is 5.1, long-term care accountability agreements with Ontario Health. We have no motions, no presentations, no correspondence, and no speakers registered. Is this item carried? Okay, thank you. Item 6.1, cultural funding policy and program structure review. We do have a presentation and a delegation on this item, so we will hold 6.1. 7.1, status update, community services committee inquiries and motions for the period ending February 7th. We do have a technical amendment on this item. Chair Dudas, would you mind reading that technical amendment in? We'll just get that on the screen.
Whereas the report relating to the status of inquiries and motions for the period ending February 7th, 2025, omitted some of the outstanding motions and directions in document 1. Therefore, it be resolved that document 1 be replaced with the version attached to this motion and on file with the city clerk.
Great. Is that technical amendment carried? Are there any questions on this item? Okay. Is the report received as amended? 8.1, there's a councillor's item from Councillor Hill on the use of delegated authority in 2023 by the Recreation, Culture and Facility Services Department. We do have a direction on this item, so we will hold this item. Small agenda today, so that's it for the formal items. So we'll go back to our first held item, which is 6.1, cultural funding policy and program structure review. And our General Manager of Recreation, Culture and Facility Services, Dan Shenny, will be giving us a presentation.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Bonjour à tous. Merci de nous accueillir aujourd'hui. I have with me today Carolyn Matt. Carolyn is the staff who administers our cultural funding program. She has done most of the work in terms of the review of the program, the external consultations that have gone on and that have led to the report that you have before you today. The cultural funding program that we're currently operating under dates back to amalgamation to 2002. So it's somewhat dated now and in need of a refresh. What you have before you today is the work that's gone on to do that, to look at the things that are working well and to work to either retain or enhance them, as well as to look at some of the things that over the years we have learned, both in terms of community input. There was an audit. The Auditor General had a look at this. So we've tried to capture the best of the last few years in terms of modifying this program. So I'll turn it over to Carolyn, who will take you through a short presentation on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next slide, please.
Cultural funding programs support local community-led cultural activities by providing grants and contributions to nonprofit organizations, artists, and cultural professionals. Supported sectors include arts, heritage, festivals, rural fairs, and museums. Cultural funding programs are application-based, competitive, and peer-assessed, and aim to be administered in a fair, inclusive, and equitable manner. Next slide, please. In 2024, cultural funding programs received 626 submissions, resulting in 411 allocations. En 2024, 34 jurys constitués des pairs ont évalué 626 soumissions. In the 2025 City of Ottawa budget, Council approved a cultural funding envelope of $12.4 million. To date, City staff have already received 423 submissions requesting over $14.5 million. Next slide, please. Ottawa has changed over since the initial framework was approved. And starting in 2023, City staff have undertaken a review of the current cultural funding processes and program structure, resulting in the recommended cultural funding policy brought forward for your approval. The policy reflects cultural expression in Ottawa today, addresses biases found in existing programs, streamlines both programs and processes, and takes more of a risk-based approach that balances accountability without imposing unnecessary requirements on applicants, recipients, and staff. La politique de financement culturel harmonise et complète la politique sur les subventions et les contributions de la municipalité en mettant l'accent sur les programmes et processus propres au programme de financement culturel. Next slide, please. But most importantly, the cultural funding policy reflects what staff have learned from the community. The goal of our engagement strategy was to have meaningful conversations with both current applicants as well as communities that are not represented or underrepresented in cultural funding programs. In total, over 900 people took the time to meet with staff and cultural community liaisons, fill in the survey, or share their experiences through other means. We would like to thank everyone for their input. Nous tenons également à remercier le Comité d'équité et d'inclusion de l'unité du soutien au financement culturel. Leurs connaissances et recommandations continuent à nous guider alors que nous tentons d'améliorer nos programmes et processus. Next slide, please. During these conversations, we heard a lot of positive feedback. There was acknowledgement of the foundational role that cultural funding plays. It is often the base that is used to leverage funding from other levels of government. There was strong support for the peer assessment process and for current program objectives. 80% des répondants ont indiqué qu'ils étaient satisfaits ou très satisfaits du soutien des services qu'ils reçoivent du personnel municipal. We also learned about how culture contributes to a sense of belonging and healthy and vibrant communities. But the conversations also highlighted what barriers people face when participating in cultural activities or accessing cultural funding programs. In other words, the conversations illustrated what should be kept and what needs to be revised. Next slide, please. The proposed cultural funding policy defines the overarching program structure and processes to incorporate, receive feedback as streamlined programs are developed in collaboration with the community. It establishes guiding values and principles that place cultural expression from all communities on more equal footing and aligns eligibility criteria and allocation processes with city values and policies, as well as charter rights of non-discriminatory practices and the right to freedom of expression. It outlines a streamlined program structure that maintains program objectives while responding to the request to be less siloed and more responsive. Policy elements related to cultural funding processes include the peer assessment process, eligibility requirements that ensure emphasis and impact on local culture, prioritization of equitable access to funding through stated priorities and processes, and a more risk-based approach that balances accountability and oversight without imposing unnecessarily onerous application and administrative requirements. Next slide, please. The policy also outlines the cultural funding program structure and program objectives. This chart illustrates the streamlining of core funding programs from 11 to 4. This approach takes into consideration what we learned through the community engagement process. Streamlining programs will allow for faster turnaround times, a less siloed approach to disciplines, and easier navigation for applicants. Next slide, please. The arts funding program and the heritage funding programs are retained. Le Fonds d'équité et d'inclusion dans les arts continuera d'être un point d'entrée essentiel pour les demandeurs des communautés en quête d'équité et un moyen de combler les lacunes historiques en matière de financement. The Indigenous Culture Program is a new program that will be developed in partnership with the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation and urban Indigenous communities. The program will be reflective of Indigenous cultural practices and will ensure that targeted investments can take place in accordance with the commitments made by the city's Reconciliation Action Plan, as well as the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation Civic Cultural Protocol and Implementation Plan. La nouvelle structure proposée maintiendra les programmes axés sur le projet, car la communauté a souligné l'importance de ceux-ci. Project funding guidelines will be revised for greater clarity, and applicants will be able to apply for higher levels of funding in project-based programs that have been capped for over 20 years. Next slide, please. The implementation of the new cultural funding policy and program structure will be completed by the end of 2028. As some organizations are currently receiving multi-year funding, staff will take a phased approach that is aligned with current program cycles to provide stability and continuity for current funding recipients. Ongoing community engagement and outreach will be key in implementing the streamlined structure. We look forward to continued learning from the community and the expertise and contributions of the Equity Inclusion Committee and Cultural Community Liaisons, particularly as the new Indigenous Culture Program is developed. Cultural funding staff will also continue to focus on access through program development, outreach, and the provision of applicant support. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan and Caroline, for all your work on the cultural funding policy. Before we go to our public delegation, we actually do have a direction from Councillor Hill. Councillor, if you'd like to read it in now.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With the understanding that applications are reviewed by an arm's length independent jury who make recommendations to the General Manager of Recreation, Culture, Facility Services, staff are directed as follows: that the funding agreements include an acknowledgement for the applicants that the funding is to be used for the purposes applied for, and that the city's funding is not an endorsement of any opinions that may be expressed by the applicants or participants to their events, that the funding agreements include a provision that the city may require recipients to remove or relocate the City of Ottawa logo or statements that may imply the city's endorsement at the city's discretion, and that cultural funding staff continue to work with the Equity and Inclusion Committee to review the range of equity-seeking communities that align with the City Council approved strategies to identify opportunities such that everyone benefits from the cultural funding programs without discrimination or exclusion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Hill. We'll get confirmation if staff will accept that direction when we get to questions. But we do have a public delegation on this item. Cassandra Olsthorne from Arts Ottawa. Welcome, Cassandra. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here to speak about something that the community is really excited about, an opportunity to bring some joy and some passion to this community. The work that's been done by staff in the community to bring deep community engagement into this process is really something that we want to champion and commend. It's not often in the cultural community that we get to influence the funding directions that happen with our public funders. And we know the struggle is real at Canada Council and Ontario Arts Council to find those meaningful connections with artists and arts groups. So the work that's been done by city staff over this past year is really incredible. And we want to take this moment to really champion the work that they've done and to thank them for their deep engagement with the community. A couple of questions that we have going forward is how the city will be working through the frameworks that I put through and how we might be addressing some of the budget pressures that are coming with opening up the funding framework to additional applicants. We've seen a huge increase in applicants to the program over the past couple of years that is driven by the incredible work the city staff has done with outreach into the community. And we want to see that continue to grow. We also know that the city is growing at a really incredible rate and that residents from across the city want to see opportunities to engage with artists and engage with their artistic community. So how can we address those gaps in our current budget? As staff said, there's a $2 million shortfall existing right now. So as the program opens up, as it should, how can we bring more inclusivity and more opportunities for artists across the region to be able to engage within this funding framework? Those are the main questions that we are hearing coming from the community, but we really just want to take this moment and mark this important moment in the program to say thank you to city staff and thank you for the city for doing this work on the cultural funding framework. We're seeing some other cities champion these kinds of changes and to bring more responsiveness in their programs so they can be more directed to the community. And it's not every city or every region that's doing this kind of deep engagement work. So in this way, Ottawa really is a leader in this, and we're really excited anytime we can champion the innovation that our cultural staff is doing in the community. We'd like to see the opportunity. So that's all I wanted to say. Just a big thank you. And we didn't want this moment to go unnoticed. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. We do have a question for you from Councillor Troster.
Hi, Cassandra. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just curious, I was going to ask the very same question of staff because this obviously seems to open things up to more potential applicants, but the fund is still capped at this point. So I know that you're seeing a greater need and a greater desire to tap into this funding. What are the kinds of new initiatives that you're seeing, or what kind of groundswell of folks do you think might be applying to this funding who are new?
Well, I think the city staff has highlighted that really well. To be able to open up an entire program just for Indigenous communities, that is incredible. So that we can be they can be directing programs specifically within that cultural community. That's really important. The work that can be done within the equity framework to pull that out of arts and heritage that can have its own program. That's really incredible as well. And that provides the opportunity to really explore what does culture mean within the city, so that we have those 4 programs that arts can be within the arts, heritage within, and then explore the other communities through equity and through the Indigenous. What we're seeing other cities doing, Toronto, just through their culture plan, has a milestone, a generational increase that's coming to the Toronto Arts Council. An additional $10 million is going through over the next few years. And that's how they're addressing what they're seeing as the cultural and artistic need in their community is through additional funding. We're seeing in Calgary is doing some really incredible work in looking at how the systems change that communities can do to be more responsive and to be more resilient in the moment. So they're putting a lot of opportunities for arts organizations to be able to shift and transform to meet this current moment in time about how can arts be more resilient and with less precarity. So that's what we're seeing in other communities. And in Ottawa, what we'd like to see is we'd like to see that open up. We'd like to see, arts organizations be able to grow into operating funds so they can be more stability. We'd like to see the operating programs grow, because the more operating programs and clients we can see in the community, that's more workplaces, and more workplaces mean sometimes more safer workplaces. And that will ultimately lead to more opportunities for community and residents to be able to participate and engage with arts in their community.
So the $10 million that the Toronto Arts Council is getting, so are then they dispersing the funds in Toronto?
Yeah. So Toronto,
it's different than here.
It works a bit differently, but I think the work that the cultural funding unit does is not dissimilar to the work the Toronto Arts Council does.
Okay. One more question. I noticed there's some major institutions like the Ottawa Art Gallery who get a large lump sum of operating funding every year, but they still have to go in front of a jury to argue for their core funding every 3 years. It has never really made sense to me because it is the Ottawa Art Gallery. We helped build the building for them. What is your feeling about the jury process for organizations that rely on core funding from the city? Because I guess it could potentially be at risk and that could be disastrous. And this funding works really differently than any other funding envelope in the city. And I understand the need to have a jury for cultural initiatives, but for core funding of key institutions, do you still think that that's an effective way to disperse the funding?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I guess there's 2 sides of how we might want to address how the city engages within those kinds of larger cultural institutions. So on one end, this is an independent arm's length organization that is responding to community, to residents, and to artists in this community. So then it should be juried by its peers, like anyone else, right? And that is the opportunity for the community and for residents to be able to have a say and an impact. If this is not the official designation, that is, maybe a path they want to go on. I don't know. I don't speak on behalf of the gallery. But I think that speaks more to the relationship of the city to cultural institutions than it does to the value and the quality of the peer assessment programs. So I'm not sure that's really, answering your question, but I think
Okay. It's still not one that makes sense to me, because I feel like if there's a certain amount that's for core operations for keeping the lights on, should that have to go to a jury every 3 years? Maybe exhibitions, special exhibitions or additional funding, but it just never made sense to me to have to come back every 3 years to keep the lights on in what is essentially an arm's length city institution. They are independent, but they're also the only City of Ottawa, gallery, other than the one we have at City Hall, that isn't controlled by the feds, right?
Yeah, I think there are many cultural institutions that would feel similarly, that their place in the community is one of additional support and stability. The Ottawa Art Gallery employs a lot of people. They provide a lot of opportunities. They're leading on a lot of really important regional and national initiatives. But as are, the folks at Nuvasan and GCTC, so is MASK, the work that they're doing in schools and communities. There's a lot of community groups that I think would feel similarly. And that's what's really exciting about this new framework is it's that piece that Carolyn Matt was speaking about the risk assessment. Maybe this will answer this implementation. I mean, all the community has is what has been posted. But I think there's enough trust by the community in the cultural staff to be able to see where this might go. And if these are conversations that can be explored further, that would be really exciting, but only if it can be met with an increased budget.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Councillor Troster. I don't see any other questions for you, Cassandra. So thank you so much for sharing your kind words and insights. So we'll now move on to questions for staff, and I'll open up by just asking our general manager to provide comments on the direction that was provided earlier by Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Staff did work with legal services on 3 bullets that Councillor Hill has brought forward, and we are supportive.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to questions from committee members, and Councillor Troster, you had your hand up first.
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to thank the cultural funding team for working so hard on this. The degree of consultation that you did for this review is really exceptional, and it's a high watermark, and it would be great to see other city departments use this as an example of how to really engage with community. I've heard nothing but good things from the arts community, but this funding framework opens up new categories for funding. How are we going to make sure that we're not just taking the same resources and spreading them thinner? Is there a plan to increase the funding for this envelope, or is that something that comes back to us? Basically, what do you need from us to help make this successful?
Chair, thank you for the question. Of course, the program would like to grow, but in the last, certainly during this term of council, we have been successful in increasing the amount by the cost of living, but we have been limited to that because of the budget constraints that have happened. It's evident that we get, as most open funding programs have experienced, we get more requests than we could ever meet, both in terms of volume and in terms of the financial ask. Having said that, it is a merit competitive-based program, and the role of the jury is really to look at what is the level of funding that the city can provide that will springboard groups to be able to apply to other funders out there in the cultural realm to fill their entire budget need. So it isn't always our expectation that we'll meet each applicant's full request, but that we will provide a level of funding. And Carolyn mentioned it in her presentation, that's foundational, that allows the group to remain viable and operate and seek other sources of funding. Evidently, as opportunities arise in the future, if we can ask for more funding, if there's an opening to do that, we will do that based on annual budget guidelines, which are really the framework we work in.
Okay, because we know that in 2024, this funding envelope would have needed an increase of roughly 2.5 million to keep up with inflation and other cuts. So I'm just really concerned that by opening up more envelopes, we're just forcing existing arts organizations to be spread even more thin and placing even more organizations in competition with each other for funding. I don't know if you have any feedback on that.
It is true that by opening the program up, however, some of the groups that will be going to the new categories were already making their programs fit as best they could within our program. So I don't think it will all be net new. And it will be a challenge that for the juries then to look at merit and where it is the city wants to emphasize its funding. And yes, I do believe there will be some adjustments to address some of the inequities. And, there is an impact to that. We won't deny that, but also think it's necessary at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor King.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the tremendous work that has gone into developing this new cultural funding policy, not unlike my colleague, Councillor Troster. The level of community engagement with input from over 900 people, including many from historically underrepresented communities, demonstrates a genuine commitment to creating a policy that reflects the diverse voices of Ottawa's cultural sector. As equity liaison, I'm approached a lot with concerns surrounding gaps in funding, application difficulties, and lack of funding. So I'm just wondering if staff can share a few planned strategies moving forward and how you will continue to engage with equity denied communities on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for the question. So there's a number of strategies. We've heard from consultations with equity denied communities that we have a few barriers that are currently in place that need to be addressed. So one is communication, making sure that communities are aware of funding opportunities, making sure that program guidelines are reflective of their cultural expressions, making sure the funding process is easy to navigate. Another strategy that we've already started to employ is just providing increased applicant support to first-time applicants and applicants from equity-denied communities that may not be familiar with funding processes, with requirements. So having staff available to provide assistance during the application process, to provide application draft reviews that has been very successful, to provide juror feedback after the assessment process is complete. So applicants, whether they were successful or not, know how to improve their funding applications. And also our work with community liaisons, we're hoping to continue because that really built a meaningful connection to communities. So members of the communities were doing engagement sessions and providing information on our behalf as they were better equipped to know how to engage with the community, how to provide information in a way that's accessible and in a way that will have the impact. And we've already seen significant success with those, but it's just more work and superimposing those strategies on existing programs.
I appreciate that outreach because I have heard in different contexts applicants getting feedback and also really appreciating a more simplified application process, which I understand from this report is something that we're pursuing. Since the municipal culture plan is to be delivered later in 2025, why is the cultural funding plan coming out in advance before the plan?
Chair, first allow me to specify the cultural plan, the bigger plan is just getting started and will not be delivered in 2025. It'll probably be late 2026 at best. This policy was delayed. It was supposed to come in late 2024, and we delayed it to get over budget and a bunch of other priorities that were among us. We believe that there's such a strong benefit to moving now to implement this. This will live within the new cultural policy, and if there is cause to alter this, we can do that in 2026 as part of the recommendations. But getting started on addressing the equity issues, in addressing the simplified applications and listening to the Auditor General's recommendations on a more focus on risk-based approach to evaluating and the groups under this program. All of those things are real tangible benefits that we thought should come now, and any other tweaks that need to be made to this policy, we can catch up on as part of a bigger process.
Since you mentioned a risk-based approach, I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on specific ways the risk-based approach will reduce administrative requirements for applicants while maintaining appropriate accountability measures.
So what we learned from the review of the program is that for the smaller applications that don't involve complexity or high financial stakes, that the city can take a more relaxed approach to both the application and the evaluation process, and that we really should be diverting our attention and resources to the bigger, more complex funding arrangements, or to groups that are struggling with the process. And so what this does is set that framework to say that the resources that we will allocate, the processes that we will put in place will reflect the risk that's involved with the level of funding that we're providing. And that is a real gain, I believe, in terms of properly using the staff resources that are involved with this program.
I appreciate that as well, because I've heard complaints from in different contexts from smaller grassroots organizations who are confronted with multiple page applications, and the time that it takes to fill out sometimes the application isn't worth the amount that they might be receiving. So I think it does make sense for us to ensure that process is streamlined. My last question is concerns metrics, and I'm just wondering what metrics and evaluation framework will be used to assess whether the new policy achieves its objectives regarding increased access, equity, and administrative efficiency.
There's a number of metrics that we're currently employing. So it's a number of applicants, first-time applicants, investment to equity-seeking communities. We've done a lot of work over the last few years, as we now have an online portal. So our data collection is much more sophisticated than it has been in the past. So there's benchmarks around self-identification of applicants, about communities used. So we'll also work with the community, because one of the concerns the community had was exactly around that, around outcomes measurements and statistics. And we heard a lot that the statistics that we had collected in the past did not really yield the kind of data that is useful to the city to tell the story and useful for the community to tell the story. So we're going to work with the community in terms of building a new data collection and statistics measurement tool as part of the reporting requirements, so that the information we have can better leverage the significant investment that the city makes into the community.
Well, I appreciate those efforts. I think that we probably need more investment than the 12.4 million in our cultural funding. But we would note that funding right now sustains a vibrant sector that really enhances our quality of life and makes our city much more attractive to residents, visitors, and businesses alike. So I want to thank staff for the work, and I also want to thank residents as well as artists and advocacy groups for their strong representation of artists and cultural institutions within Ottawa. And I look forward to seeing how this funding policy is implemented and how it evolves when we have our new municipal culture plan. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor King. Councillor Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for the work that was put into this report. I kind of want to speak to, I think, the issues of specific programming versus more broad community programming, because I want to make sure that some things don't get missed out. So I guess to put it into perspective, will these cultural changes cultural program changes make it less or more difficult for large, broad community events to receive this type of funding. For a specific example for me in Barrhaven would be our Canada Day event, which is second largest in Canada, principally from local private donations and such. Extraordinarily diverse event because we have participation from all of the different, ethnic groups, religious groups, ages and such in that event. But would that be overlooked through a policy like this because it's talking about one big broad event as opposed to a specific program that's targeting one of these community organizations?
Chair, this program is a cultural funding program, and so the focus is, as has been and continues to be, on the cultural, artistic heritage merit of the content that's presented to us. It's a reality that in some cases, this is the only show in town, that there is no special event grants funding per se for general cultural special events. What we've seen over the years, because this program is available and there isn't much of an alternative, is that groups have included in their events cultural components. And that goes to groups like Dragon Boat, for example, or the Barrhaven Canada Day, where in order to qualify, they have added concerts, music, dance, those kinds of things. And the merit of those things will continue to be the piece that we will look at. This program does not just, somebody's having an event, this is not an events-based type of thing. That does not change with this. We will continue to look at artistic merit as the leading component that the juries will evaluate.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Could you speak to the intention behind moving to a risk-based approach for staff resources on cultural funding? How will this approach create more equity in access to grant funding?
The risk-based approach is one that that members of council have certainly heard about from the Auditor General, where when we expend resources to make sure that city investments are done wisely, are done in according to program, that given the restraint number of resources that we have, we should really take a risk-based approach that says, where are we most where is the highest impact in terms of deeper scrutiny, paying more attention, requiring more in terms of staff review and evaluation. And so what this will do is as was mentioned in responding to Councillor King's response, is to focus on making it easier and less onerous for the smaller groups where the grants are small, the event is relatively straightforward, and shift the resources that would otherwise be expended to a greater focus on the more complex agreements that we have, and the agreements that we have where we know that we really do need to pay a little bit more attention to it. So, and from an equity perspective, what that will do is it'll make it easier for the first time new applicants for small programs because of the simplified application and monitoring requirements.
Okay, thank you. Will or could this then, this new approach lead to any less scrutiny in how our taxpayer money is being spent?
Chair, evidently there's a finite amount of scrutiny that we can provide, and so it will shift the effort from a general approach to a more targeted approach, which we think is right. It is still a risk-based approach. There is always the opportunity for a small group with small funding to go awry. it's not common and it's a bit easier to spot. So I don't think it exposes the city to significant risk. But this is a shift in where we will in terms of safeguarding city investments.
Would there be a multi-year management of the different applicants to this so that should there be an example of a small organization that goes awry, that would impact on their subsequent applications year over year?
Thank you for the question. So I just would like to add one thing, that all funding recipients and their allocations are subject to a funding agreement. So in terms of monitoring and ensuring that funds are used for the purposes that they were intended to, there is oversight. Every funding recipient has to report on funds used and on activities provided. Is there, I believe your question is, would there be consequences if in one year something happened, would they be able to apply the following year? The mechanisms that we have in place is if a funding recipient did not use funds as intended, there are clauses in the funding agreement that would require those funds to be returned. So until that file is closed, they could not reapply to the same program. At the same time, things happen. Sometimes programs can't be delivered as proposed. Sometimes, that results in funding returned. And once the funds are returned, the file's closed, and that group absolutely can come back and reapply. So again, it's just making sure that the funding agreement is monitored and that's executed.
Okay, thank you for that. And one last question for you. You note that in the report that the financial support for the local culture sector is, and I quote, an investment that pays dividends in economic outcomes. Is there a mechanism we're using to track those economic outcomes?
So I will echo what I already responded to Councillor King around outcomes measurement. Yes, we need to solidify that, and we do track financial impact. We do track in terms of other funding leveraged. With the tools we have in place now, we can actually pull data and report on it. So we look forward to being able to provide that information specifically targeted for this funding envelope going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Chair, I can add that this program does fund things like festivals and marquee festivals, and that Ottawa Tourism often works with us in terms of, helping profile that and the city's investment in those types of programs, which have a direct connection to economic development.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for this report. I will say that there's a bit of opposing opinion that I wrestle with in my ward, because there are some taxpayers who believe that there shouldn't be much cultural investment at all, and others who believe that there's significant community benefit, there is a return on investment, it contributes to the vitality of our community and city. So it's, I think, part of our jobs to help explain to our communities that overall investments in cultural activities is definitely a net positive for our city. Listen to a number of questions. Is there any requirement for recipients of grants from the city to report back to us on an annual basis? This was the event. Here's how the city's grant helped us. Here's the number of people who attended.
Yes, absolutely. Every funding recipient has to report on funds used. That includes a report on activities that take place, attendance, statistics, number of volunteers, volunteer hours currently, as well as, of course, the budget that it took ultimately to deliver that program.
Excellent. Okay. And just one final question, given Riverward is host to many festivals over the year, can you just differentiate for me the difference between, and maybe I heard this from the general manager, but cultural festivals versus festivals, non-cultural festivals?
Well, from our perspective, the biggest is that non-cultural festivals generally would not qualify for funding if you are having a sports festival, sometimes known as a tournament. Um, uh, and I say that only half jokingly because tournaments have tried to apply to this. So yeah, it really is cultural merit. So if a festival is going to include some artistic component to it, then they could apply and be judged on the merit of that, both in terms of scope and quality and those kind of criteria. But this is not a broad festival funding. And as I mentioned earlier, people often come to this because there is no other broader category for other types of festivals.
So if I am a cultural festival executive director, how do these changes potentially impact my festival? Is it going to be beneficial to me, easier to apply, more grant opportunities? The one thing I hear from festival directors repeatedly is how tight funding is, how much they're still struggling post-COVID. What can you share with me?
For festivals with cultural components, this will not change to a great extent their how they would apply, what they would apply for. A lot of the cultural festivals that we already fund are quite familiar with the program, and I don't think we'll see a big difference in terms of process. They are used to the jury process. They may get their results a bit faster as we expedite that. And for festivals that are early in the year, that is an important component, and staff do a great job of trying to time results so that festivals can properly plan. But otherwise, this maintains the support that the municipality gives those festivals.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just a process question. I know on document 2 of this item on page 37 is the Major Agricultural Fairs Program. I'm just wondering why that program is under this committee and this budget and not under the Rural Affairs Committee.
Yes, major agricultural fairs are currently funded through cultural funding programs due to their preservation of agricultural heritage and celebration of it during the events. We had received feedback from the fairs. The reason why it was indicated that we were looking at possibly moving it to the Rural Affairs Office was because during our consultation process, we learned that agricultural fairs really struggle, just like other applicants, with our application process. They're not really from the cultural world. They don't apply to other funders, so it's very difficult to navigate. And we know that they also apply for project-based funding through the Rural Affairs Office. So staff have reached out to the Rural Affairs Office just to see whether or not we can streamline and make it easier for the fairs to access their operating funding that way. It's premature, but it's a conversation that we would like to pursue. We have communicated that for now it is status quo. Nothing will change. Nothing will change without consulting them first, and they would definitely be part of the conversation should that be pursued. But again, we do want to respond to the concerns voiced, and we want to make sure that they receive the best possible service and that they're not duplicating efforts for no reason.
No, thank you very much for that. And in a previous life, I have filled out these applications and they are onerous and very detailed. So anything we can do to certainly help. And my sign off line, Madam Chair, is there's no culture without agriculture. So thank you very much.
Very catchy, Councillor Brown. Councillor Lowe?
Thanks, Chair. I'm curious. So in the document 1, that sort of expands on everything. Towards the end, there's a little glossary of definitions. I'm curious how you arrived at the definition that's been written for racism.
Thank you for that question. We have referenced the anti-racism strategies and other documentations to reference it, so it aligns with other City of Ottawa policies.
So do other City of Ottawa policies also say that racism is infused in our institutions, policies, and cultures that benefit white people and hurt racialized people? Like, is that language that's used elsewhere, or is this sort of the only document that says that?
It is definitely referenced in the equity and inclusion lens, I believe. So, and the anti-racism strategy, but I can't speak to all other city policies, whether or not it's phrased like that.
Okay. That line does concern me because racism doesn't come from just one group of people. We've seen examples of racism from every group of like every ethnicity in the city, and it's not just one group that benefits from this type of behavior. So, we say the racism cuts into the fabric of our society, and in language like this sort of does exacerbates it. And I don't think it's fair to single out a certain group of people because that in itself is also racist. So I'm not very comfortable with that language. Perhaps that's something we can look at between now and council, but I'll just highlight that as a point to look at for now. So thanks.
Thank you for that comment. I think that's a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. Thanks so much. I'm not on this committee, but I feel a lot of my world is getting involved in festivals and related items like this on a regular basis. With the increased costs of policing and different items, is this part of any of the grant applications right now when we're doing these kind of things? Because a good example is the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which I've been trying time and again to get revived. We've been told we require 22 police officers, but we don't have them. So these are kind of the challenges that we're having versus maybe another festival like Pride, for example, where they don't require as many police officers, same route. These are kind of questions that are out there to make a level playing field for all festivals. Are we incorporating these into the grants, knowing about cost of policing? What are we doing to ensure we can make sure a lot of these cultural festivals can survive?
Thank you for the question. Yes, every festival has different pressures. Some require additional resources such as that. We definitely heard from the community that there is increased cost associated with running the events. Some of them are costs that are incurred through city services. Ultimately, there's separation in terms of contractual agreements between police services, the C committee. So I know there's a lot of players at the table that look at these issues, bylaw review that is happening.
Sure.
So in terms of the cultural funding envelope, we do support entire operations. Paying for police, paying for whatever services they require to operate the event is part of that budget and is being looked at. At the same time, there is limits in terms of how much money there's in the cultural funding envelope. So ultimately, the juries will have to, again, assess based on viability and budgeting. So it's related, yes, but it can't address it directly in terms of, like pinpointing specific funding towards those pressures.
Wonderful. And I assume all grant applications are public. What the requests are within those applications, or is that something that is dealt with by staff and not exposed? Because I think that's kind of critical, because for some parades, they call them marches, they don't require as many police. And I know the great police board members here, like Councillor Carr, that sits on there, is wrestling with this all the time as well. It's basically putting certain festivals at a massive disadvantage by semantics. And, it's clearly called the Pride Parade, but they call it a march, so it's less policing. So, you know what I mean? Like, are these, sorry, back to the original question, is this public information about what this actually covers, and how do groups that now see this increased cost apply to get these kind of grants?
Chair, the applications themselves would generally not be public documents because they include a bunch of personal information on, the board of directors, their phone numbers, their addresses, all those kinds of things.
Sure.
What we fund to a specific group would be public information, and we regularly are able to disclose that. On the issue of parades, because parades are a bit of an odd duck, they are often attached to festivals, but are not necessarily a culturally fundable activity in this program. And so for some festivals, we may fund concerts or a play or something that is part of the overall festival that also has a parade attached to it.
Certainly.
Our funding, that would not generally qualify, either a parade or a demonstration would generally not qualify for funding on this, but other parts of what the organization does might, if it's as a cultural component. And that's where a bit of the dilemma is that the city is supporting a component of what the group does, but not necessarily the entire gamut of activities that they undertake, which may have very little to do with culture.
Yeah, and fair enough. And that's where I think, back to the example of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. It was always called that, but now they're enlarging their festival to include other items that take place during the month. It seems like it would qualify, but I guess that's the challenge. And it's similar to Pride. It's a full festival. It's bringing the whole city together. So they apply for, I think it's what, 80,000, and I don't know how it breaks out. I just want to make sure that it's transparent about the requirements are the same for every single festival across the board and why they would be different. So if you're saying that you're able to detail what is requested, police-wise, what barriers, all that sort of stuff, and that's public information, please just send it to me, and I'm more than satisfied with that. I'm just trying to make sure our festivals can continue to run more than anything. Asian Festival, all of them, they're all having challenges right now. So, but thank you very much, Mr. Chenier.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Conseiller Plante.
It's just an invitation to Councillor Tierney. My big goal is to get a Santa Claus parade in my ward. We have a lot of families. So if ever you want to combine your parade and my idea, you were welcome anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, Conseiller Plante. Second round, Councillor Schroster.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify because I'm in contact with the executive director of Pride. They actually were told they needed 32 police officers last summer, and that's actually part of why their parade route was cut short because they weren't able to get enough of them. I guess a question for me is, do we have a sense of how much of this cultural funding is going towards paid duty police officers for parades? Or are you suggesting that the cultural funding would go to the side activities and not to the march itself?
I don't have that data offhand. However, typically festivals, because festivals have opportunity to generate quite a bit of other revenue towards their event. Typically, the contributions that the city makes toward a festival is a very small percentage. So, and it goes to the overall administration and programming and event budget. So, could we look at data around policing? We probably would have that information in the reporting budgets that come in, but we don't collect it currently. But just anecdotally, because the percentage funded is so small compared to overall operations, we don't direct where that money has to go towards, like, specifically.
Right. Okay. So according to Pride, they spend it on artists, on staging, on operating, and then they get other funding to pay for paid duty. But I also think if we're talking about an equity lens, if we're talking about an increase in hate crimes towards specific groups, the requirement for higher security at Pride, there were good reasons for it, given incidents that we've seen in the last few years. So I just think that's something to keep top of mind. Because if organizations are buckling under the weight of a new requirement, which is being imposed, I mean, Pride was floored. They were told only a few days before the parade that they had to switch their route, and the parade could have been canceled because of it. So this is an issue aside from cultural funding, but it does always concern me if it's pulling from operating funding that we may be providing in some way, or it's preventing a festival like St. Patrick's Day parade from happening. So that might be something to address a police board in the future, because I think there's many organizations that are struggling with this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, colleagues, for your engagement on this file. Before we approve the recommendation, I just want to confirm that staff will accept the direction that was provided from Councillor Hill.
Yes, Chair.
Great, thank you. And now, committee, we need to approve the recommendation, which is to approve the new cultural funding policy as outlined in document 1. Is that carried?
Dissent.
Dissent.
Dissent, please.
Okay, we've got 3 registered dissents, Councillor Lowe, Councillor Hill, and Councillor Brown. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to our second held item, which is a councillor's item by Councillor Hill on the use of delegated authority. I know that your direction was now on the last item. Would you still like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do appreciate now that, the fact that staff raised their cultural grant program report today. And I probably could have addressed these questions in the previous item, but I was unaware of this in December and certainly needed to respect the will of committee from our last meeting when 4 members of the council did vote to suppress my ability to ask some questions on this tough topic at that meeting. When staff are using delegated authority for equity inclusion grants, I guess this is a question for you, Dan. When staff are using delegated authority for equity and inclusion grants, how do you define inclusion? And is there a measured KPI that you will be using when determining the success of that grant?
Chair, generally for grant applications, and I assume you're talking within the cultural funding program, although there may be other grant programs, we ask the applicant to explain, to detail out what activities or programs they are going to be offering with city funds that are going to contribute to inclusion, going to include more people, open doors, reduce barriers, those kinds of things. In terms of the cultural program, that would be reviewed by a jury of peers to evaluate if, in fact, this contribution is real, significant, whether it addresses a real concern, and the allocation is based on that. It's based on what they're proposing in terms of an action or a service offered to the community.
Thank you. And when making grant decisions for 2025, will the grant panels consider whether the grants in previous years were successful in increasing inclusivity in our city?
Yes, that is part of understanding. And as Carolyn mentioned earlier, each group is required to provide a post-event report, which is then available for us to factor into any following applications.
Thank you. That's my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Hill. Is this item received? Thank you. Moving on to the second part of our agenda, in-camera items, we have none. Information previously distributed, we have 1 item listed on the agenda, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan 2023-24 Progress Update. Did anyone want to lift this onto the agenda? No? Okay, item number 11, motions of which notice have previously been given. We have 2. 11.1, from Councillor Kavanagh on the Belltown Dome facility replacement, and we do have a delegation on this item. Is Mr. Cullen online? Welcome, Mr. Cullen. You have 5 minutes.
I would expect before I do my delegation to hear from the councillor why the motion is here. Then I can respond to it. Is that not the normal procedure? Hello?
Sorry, we just had a hard time hearing you. It was a bit garbled. You're asking for the motion to be read out?
No. You're asking for a public delegation before we hear the councillor give the justification for the item. Normally, you have a presentation, then it's followed by public delegations.
Okay, that, I'm hearing from our clerk that that's not required, but if the councillor would like to reintroduce the motion, I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you, Chair. The motion has been was given notice last week, so I think everyone has looked at it. I don't feel it's necessary to read it, but if just to make it quick, I'll just read the therefore. Be it resolved that the city staff considered the needs of Bay Ward and inner city upper urban sector as soon as possible. Oh, this is the wrong one. I'm sorry, I've got the wrong one. Pardon me. I've got the second one. You can put it up on the screen for me. Thanks. Okay. Thank you. Be it resolved that the staff be directed to engage with the community to determine their priorities and preferences for the future recreational use of the Belltown Dome site, ensuring a thorough and inclusive public consultation process, and be further resolved that the engagement process staff work with the ward councillor and the community to analyze the results of the community consultation and develop next steps in determining the preferred community option, funding options for the development of a concept plan, and third, preliminary costing for the preferred option to inform future funding discussions. So this is got, just to make it clear, there's no funding attached to this whatsoever at this time. Our general manager can be asked questions about that. This is just because it's a very unusual situation that we have a rink that is undersized, unheated. It has a dome over top for the last 46 years, and it's aged out. And it's trying to figure out what to do for next steps since we are not renewing single pads. We haven't got that policy in place, but we're pretty clear that going forward, the city wants to do double pads, and there's just no possible way that could be a double pad. So options have to be looked at. So this is a very unique situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Okay, Mr. Cullen, the floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I won't take up 5 minutes time here. I'm representing the Belltown Neighbors Association, the community surrounding Belltown Dome. It was with some sadness and regret that we learned that the dome would not be available as a indoor rink. It's not just our community, but it's also hockey leagues from Canada, from Nepean, from West Ottawa that are being deprived of an ice surface. But it's clear that this thing cannot be maintained. We're here in support of Councillor Kavanagh's motion. It's a city asset. The city staff have told us that they will be looking for alternatives for this site, and we just want to promote the fact that there would be public consultation and look forward to coming up with a good reuse of that city facility. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none, I do want to note on the agenda that we did receive 4 pieces of correspondence on this item. Are there any questions to staff on the motion? Councillor Tierney?
I just wanted to thank the local councillor, Councillor Kavanagh, for her hard work on this project. I know that you're very concerned about the dome, and we appreciate all the great work you do at this committee and council. So thank you for that.
Okay, Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I don't dispute the need, is why a local councillor has to come to committee and council to address an aged out facility. There should be automatic processes across the city that when assets come to end of life, before assets come to end of life, there are funds and a plan available to address those assets. And I waited 10 years for the ACC to get funding finally in the 2025 budget. And in all those years, staff tell me, but Riley, there are other facilities in greater need across the city. So I waited my turn. So I want to know, first of all, why does the local councillor have to write a motion to address an aged out facility and not have a plan already in place by staff?
Chair, I believe that the councillor's intent here is just to lay out in a formal sense the process that we will undertake for considering what might go on the site of the existing Belltown Dome Arena. What you see in terms of the motion is essentially the process to look at what the community needs in terms of a service and what their priorities might be for that site, understanding that it will likely not be a single pad arena, and it would likely be something else that meets the priorities in the community. The councillor did consult with staff in terms of laying out that process, which follows a process similar to what we've done in other communities.
Very well. I appreciate that from the general manager. And I guess given that I've seen a lot of commentary in public from folks in this community, including the delegate who has for quite some time talked about the need to advance this project, I certainly didn't want to be left with the impression that this was in any way being prioritized above other higher priorities. All this to say, I support the review that's spelled out in the motion, and certainly agree that this facility needs attention going forward. So I will be supporting the motion, and I appreciate the clarification from staff.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Just before wrap up from Councillor Kavanagh, I just want to confirm if staff can accommodate this motion and if they have any comments to add.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, Councillor Kavanagh on wrap up.
Thank you very much. And thank you to my colleague, Councillor Brockington. It is unusual. Usually when you're talking about replacement, a play structure is replaced with a play structure. This is different because we just don't know what this could be. It's a very unusual situation, being it's an undersized rink that was outdoor and then had a cover put on it, basically. So at 44 years ago, it had federal grants back then to do it. So it's aged out. And yes, I think there should be plans when we know something's going to age out. So far, the refrigeration mechanism to keep the ice, an ice pad, like they have at Rink of Dreams and things like that, is kaput. It can't be replaced. It's too expensive. So we're relying on the weather. So you can imagine that it was open during that time when we had that real cold. Now it'll be closed. So it's totally unreliable. They can still use a Zamboni. They can still have ice when the weather is suitable. So now it'll be closed. So it's just not functional to continue like this. So next steps have to be looked at. So that is the reason we're bringing it forward. So it's different.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Is the motion carried? Great, thank you. Second item is another notice of motion that was previously given, and it's also by Teresa Kavanagh. This is titled Bay Ward Accessible Recreation Facility Project Development. Councillor, did you want to reintroduce this motion for the benefit of the public delegation?
Sorry. The city staff considered the needs of Bay Ward and inner city urban transit as soon as possible when opportunities for new multi-use facilities with arena ice pads arise. So I think that's self-explanatory that we're looking for opportunities. We need more opportunities in urban areas, especially with growth. We've got stage 2 LRT running through the community. There's going to be extensive intensification. So these are opportunities to look at. What has been earmarked for the future has been the Queensview site for the bus depot, but they're not ready to give that up yet. So it's very long term. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we do have a delegation on this item. Again, it's Alex Cullen, who's representing the Belltown Neighbors Association. And Alex, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope I can bank this because I'm not using all 5 minutes. But I'm here simply to support Councillor Kavanaugh's motion. We discussed it at Belltown. That we know from the neighboring hockey leagues in the area that there is a need for facilities, ice pad facilities in the West End. We're underserved right now. We understand, though, that this will be a wait. It's in the Pinecrest Queensview secondary plan, and there's a development charge levy that's going to contribute towards it. It's off in the future, and we just want to make sure that it's in the city's plans as we go forward. No queue jumping, no reprioritization, just remember us. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your delegation. I do see a question for you, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. So I just have one quick question for the general manager, and in the context of the inner urban.
Sorry, Councillor, was that a question for the delegation?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, Alex, we will release you. Thank you for your continued advocacy. Much appreciated. And now questions to staff. Councillor Brockington.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So just one quick question for the GM, if I may, in the context of the inner urban transect per the motion. I'm trying to think, as an example, the J.A. Duluth Arena, for example, which I believe is a single ice pad. How do facilities outside of Bay Ward get considered in as part of this motion? Just help me understand, since I wasn't here for the when this was introduced.
Chair, the wording in this motion uses the transect terminology because, as we've discussed with the councillor, our recreation master plan was developed based on the transects that the planning introduced as part of the official plan, and we based the master plan. So the need for any type of recreation facility was was established based on broader than ward into the transect level in order to look broader afield, because many of these facilities, like arenas and pools, do not serve specific neighborhoods, but serve an area of the city, if you will. And so when looking at this, we would look not just at Bay Ward, but we would look at within the transect that Bay Ward is included in, what are the other facilities and where is our most likely highest demand for this kind of facility? Where are the gaps? And we will do that looking at the entire transect. I can't specifically remember if Duluth is in the same transect, but if it is, we would certainly consider it and others that might be in that area. And as the motion also recognizes, there is a longer term vision to look at Queensview as an opportunity to develop, and we are collecting development charges for that project, which could well meet this requirement should that ever come to be.
Okay, so just high level per transect, as facilities age out and as staff try and wrap their head around the best course of action going forward, it really is a review on how to build multi-use facilities going forward once facilities age out. Is that basically my understanding? Is that correct?
That is part of it, but within multi-use facilities, there are very different components where we are tracking the provision levels at a more specific level. Arenas, pools, gyms, we are tracking those separately. And that would be that would be factored into a decision on whether there are ice pads to be included in a new facility, how many, and the location, trying to get a better distribution than what has been the historical distribution. So those would all be looked at the Transect level, and in the case of arenas, in terms of overall ice time and the demand for that. And that is a separate piece of work on evaluating post-COVID demand versus our current supply and how many more we need. It's work that we had started pre-COVID and that needed some time to reestablish the ice market as hockey and ringette and figure skating came back, but also that we have all of our arenas returned to us. In this case, this year we're operating with 2 arenas down, Belltown as well as Bernard Gramait, which is still being used as a shelter. So it's trying to establish what the overall demand for ice time is, because in 2019, pre-pandemic, we were in a position where there was a really soft case for building many more ice pads, certainly in some parts of the city. So that's all work that needs to be redone, and that will be part of looking at future of recreation facilities per Transect.
Excellent, thank you. Could I just ask, Madam Chair, for an email from staff just giving me the facility condition index of the JA Duluth Arena, and what possibilities do staff envision could happen at this site going forward if a redeveloped site were to happen? Just some high level ideas. Thank you.
Staff take that as direction.
Yes, we'll take that as direction.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. So I'm curious about the regular process for when the recreation needs like multi-use facilities and ice pads and stuff arise. Like, what's the normal process to sort of look at needs in different communities? Like, is there a process that exists already that looks at Bay Ward, the inner urban transect, the suburban transect, rural transect? Because to me, I personally feel like this is not exactly necessary.
There is a process. Most of the new facilities are driven by the master plan and the 10-year planning horizon. Most of it is driven by development charges, which are pretty fundamental to being able to afford these kinds of facilities. Looking at population growth, where the population growth is going to be, and trying to anticipate that when we do the refresh of the development charges, the update. We did one in 2024 that did capture the Queensview potential for a facility. We will be doing, as I understand it, another refresh later this year to bring that up to date. And then generally our 10-year build-out plan for that is based on those development charges. There is not an established program for rebuilding completely places like the Belltown Dome or existing Duluth. There's a life cycle program that maintains them and keeps them operational, type of thing, but there is no plan or funding to actually replace those in their entirety at this point. I expect that will be part of the discussion the council will have when Infrastructure Services brings forward their asset management plans mid-year, looking at the bigger gap between what we have and what we're going to need in the future to maintain service levels.
So my understanding then is the difference between new facilities and newer communities funded by DCs, like that, the fact that that's available to new communities, is that the reason why this motion would be necessary for an older community like Bayward? Like, is that my interpretation of that correct or not?
It's not just new communities. We do have development charges inside the Greenbelt that we're also collecting to capture growth inside the Greenbelt. And we do have, the ability to fund projects, and we are funding projects based on growth in communities inside the Greenbelt. This, in the case of Queensview, for example, that is a based on the growth that area will see through redevelopment and the increase in residential components. So it's said it also applies to existing neighborhoods where growth is being experienced.
Okay, so last question then, like, is considering the needs of a certain transect something you would do with or without this motion anyway?
Chair, yes, this provides a very specific direction for a very specific area, and I think, as the delegation said, it's essentially a keep us in mind type of motion. But one of the primary purposes of council approving the recreation master plan in 2022 was, in fact, to do an inventory and an analysis of what these transects will need going out to 2031, I believe. So that by doing that, we have established the requirement to look at transects and how well served they are in the next 10 years and what they will need to be well served.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much, Dan, for all that information. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Carr?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think I'm good. Actually, my question was just with respect to how it dovetailed into the asset management plans, but Dan covered it in the last response. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh on wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for the questions. This is about when you close an arena, you're losing it permanently, and we have to look at the overall number. And we're also looking at very extensive growth in the area because Bayward itself, and that's just Bayward, has 7 new stations, brand new stage 2 stations coming on board, most of which will have intensification. The population increase will be very heavy. So when you lose a rink and then you're having growth in the area, you have to look at, well, where are these people going to go? There's still going to be need for rinks. And so they need to be in the core areas that where the rink was lost. There is a lot of clubs that rely on these rinks. There's a lot of users. Even under conditions right now, the Belltown Dome was still being used. I saw the parking lot full. The practices, whenever they could get that ice, it's needed. But that's obviously not going to be the future. So we have to plan, and we have the opportunities, and hopefully we can work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is this motion carried?
Dissent.
Okay, dissent from Councillor Lowe. Okay, so the next item is notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meetings. Are there any notices of motions? Okay, inquiries. Are there any inquiries? Councillor Truster?
Thank you so much. The affordable housing crisis has been of significant concern since the City of Ottawa first declared a housing and homelessness emergency in January 2020. Since this initial declaration, the city has experienced unforeseen rates of homelessness and individuals seeking refuge at emergency shelters, which continue to worsen every year. Many shelters have become severely overwhelmed by the escalating number of individuals experiencing homelessness, with the chronic lack of affordable housing continuing to push their already limited capacities. As well, recent research findings from Help Seeker Technologies report on homelessness in Ontario indicate that approximately 65.2% of people experiencing homelessness stay in emergency shelters due to a severe lack of alternative housing solutions. While the city is scaling up investments in multiple forms of affordable housing, our shelter system is still overburdened, and this places ongoing financial and logistical pressure on the city. Could staff please provide the following information? The average annual cost to the city of a single individual staying in the shelter system. The average annual cost to the city of a single parent with between 1 and 3 children staying in the shelter system. the average annual cost to the city of a single parent with more than 3 children staying in the shelter system, the shelter options for couples of the opposite sex, and average annual cost to the city if applicable, and the emergency shelter options for individuals with pets and average annual cost to the city if applicable. Finally, are the above noted costs fixed or variable depending on use? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Troster. Any other inquiries? Okay, seeing none. Other business, we have none. Just before we adjourn, I just want to thank Chair Dudas again for giving me the opportunity and experience to chair today's meeting, and to my colleagues for their support to allow me to chair. With that, we will adjourn. The next meeting is Tuesday, March 2025. Tuesday, March
Thank you.
25th, 2025. Take care.